we all know how to ask open-ended questions, right? So make sure that you're using those whenever you're networking. If you're going to build a relationship, you need to exchange information. And a yes, no does not give the opportunity for an exchange of information. A closed-ended question doesn't do that. So ask those open-ended questions. All kinds of things you can ask about, but ask those open-ended questions. Here's some samples of questions that I like to use. This would be another place I would love to hear two things from you all. Which of these questions either stand out as positive or negative in your mind? And what questions do you ask?
So, hi, it's Krishna.
Yes, Krishna.
I typically ask them what their story is, like their path to where they are now.
Great question.
Which, similar to how did you get into the field, but sometimes it's not so pointed as that. And then I would say that the informational interviews, get to know you type of conversations I've had with people I didn't know previously have all sort of happened kind of by accident. And
Yep.
Which is a good thing. You know, I had a job that I applied to and then there was a hiring freeze. But I knew someone who worked at the company and they knew who the hiring manager was. And so they helped set me up to still speak to that person. And it ended up being more of a, you know, actually, he kind of already led with some of the answers to these questions you have here without me having to ask actually much. So he kind of like laid it out on the line, like how he got to where he was, what they do there at that job, and things like that. So, but I think you're absolutely right. You do need to be armed and prepared with all the questions to ask in case, you know, they're not going to kind of divulge much and you're going to have to kind of like get it out of them.
Great. You're right. They're not going to necessarily offer information if you're not prepared to ask for it. And it's a good interviewer or a good, a well-trained person who knows that when you're coming for an informational meeting, that they want to have some information already prepared, like how did they get in the field or what's going on. So, Scott asked the question, and I see it disappeared from there, but, the second question seems like it could be weird because you may not know, it implies you don't know what's going on in the industry. And so you may just ask it a slightly different way, Scott, right? Instead of saying, what are some of the important issues in the industry today? You might say, based on my research, I see these three things as important issues in the industry. Do you see any others? And then you can then follow with, how are these issues affecting your company and impacting on your department? Right? So another way of just asking the same kind of a question, but I get your point there. What app do you use most at your job, Daryl? It's a good question, especially if you're in the IT space or you're in a customer space potentially or sales space where working with apps is a big part of the success of the position. So I think that's a great question. The only thing I would do is maybe just add to it, right? What apps do you use most in your job, and how do you make the best use of them? The way you have the question phrased with the ending at most at your job allows me just to say, well, I use the Waze app most. And that's the end of the conversation. Right? But if you ask the follow-on of how are you using it, right now, I tend to use Waze because I find that it's the more accurate directions and the better timing than if I go to Google or Apple or whatever other apps there, a mapping app that I may be using, right? So you want to keep it as open-ended as possible that engages people into more conversation. But great question.